Hi, my name is Callie Burke, and we're here for the Google Hangout with a geologist about space wearables and Mars lava tubes. So we have Lindsay Hayes here, and we also have David Miranda, who is the creator of Space Wearables. And so before we get started, just information, this is both of those, both Survivor, Mars lava tube, and Space Wearables are Kennedy Space Apps challenges. And so everybody's working on challenges all around, and they're going to the global one. But one thing that's a little unique about Kennedy is that what we'll be doing is holding our own judging. So if you work on a Kennedy project, even if you're not nominated for global judging, you will be able to submit a video, the 1-minute video, same requirements as global judging, and we will actually have a panel of Kennedy experts, including David here, who will be talking, who will be reviewing all those videos. So they'll get a chance to see your projects, and then the top ones they'll look a little closer and select a top project. So we will have a prize for each of the top projects for each of the Kennedy challenges that that we'll be announcing afterwards. But just so you guys know, and if you have any questions for our experts, they're here to answer them. So we've got the Q&A function turned on here. We'll also be trying to monitor the space wearables and Mars lava tubes hashtags and the Hackpads. But really, if you're able to, the Q&A function is really the best way while we're inside the Google Hangout. So right now we'll go first to Lindsay and have her just a little bit of an introduction about her background.
Thanks, Callie. As Callie introduced, my name is Lindsay Hayes. I work at JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, where I work in the Mars Program Office, specifically in the Mars Science Office, sort of thinking about future missions and that kind of thing. My background is in geology, geobiology specifically, so thinking about how to look at interactions between the Earth system and the biological system over time, including deep time and also in modern environments. So I've done quite a bit of field work, including field work in the Yellowstone environment and looking at microbial mats there and things. Sorry, as well as in some ancient sediments in the Oman region. So different types of field work for different types of sciences, but have some field experience. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Lindsay, and thanks for joining us. And so, just an FYI, even though people from different NASA centers know each other for lots of reasons, Lindsay and I actually know each other because we were both in graduate school at MIT. So I worked very closely with her husband, who's another jet propulsion engineer. And so we have also David Miranda.
Hi everyone, I'm David Miranda. I work at Kennedy Space Center, the same place where Callie works and where this challenge came from. What I do at KSC is I'm currently the lead analyst for operations analysis in the GSDO program, which is a program that's headquartered at KSC, and we're basically setting up the ground infrastructure for the future rocket that NASA is developing for the deep space exploration missions. My background is in aerospace engineering and industrial engineering. So my focus with this group in operations analysis, we're trying to find first the system that we're designing, is it good, is it useful? And then eventually we want to look at process improvement, how can we make the system better? I'm also working on a project related to wearables, where we're trying to design a wearable heads-up display that technicians at KSC can use and help them do their job better today and more efficiently.
So, and David, David actually was the challenge creator of this. We actually did this last year, and this Space Wearables project at NASA was now funded, came about between last year's Space Apps and this one, which has been really exciting. And so we did update the challenge a little bit. Last year the focus was on ground processing and astronauts. This year we've kind of expanded it, where we also want to look at really research and how lab and researchers in the field might be able to use it, because we have lots of people that work for NASA that do that. So we'll go to Lindsay now and have her just, why don't you talk a little bit about what it's like to be in the field, what maybe, what going there, what preparations you have to make, and what your work entails when you went to Yellowstone or another location.
So the number one thing, as you can probably imagine, when you go to the field is sort of trying to prepare for what you're planning on doing, and then also prepare at least a little bit for things that may go wrong, or things that might change, or conditions that might change, that kind of thing. So you have to think through every step of the field work that you want to do. Okay, if I'm going to do this, I need to think about, I need every single piece of equipment that I would need to make this kind of measurement, and a place to put whatever samples I might collect. And think if I'm going to spend a whole day looking at this region, I'm going to need enough sample bags or whatever, enough space in my backpack to carry 15 samples. Whereas if I think I might be able to cover more space the next day, do I have the right amount of space to carry even more samples? So the number one thing about going into the field is planning, and planning ahead, and planning for both expected and unexpected circumstances. In terms of what the field work that I would do in Yellowstone, there are a number of different experiments that I did. Some were as simple as, making temperature and pH measurements at various places down a hot spring outflow channel, and corresponding that to samples of biomass that we collected, that we then looked at the genetic information from to get some idea of what the community was doing there. To a later experiment, which actually just got published recently, about thinking about these particular organisms that live at 85 degrees, 90 degrees Celsius, so very, very warm, just below boiling temperatures, really, what they eat. These are microbial organisms that live in communities, and we see them in a number of places in Yellowstone, but just because you know what something is, you don't always know what it does or what it's eating. And then in terms of the more ancient field work, when you go into the field as a geologist, it's a lot about mapping sections. So, what do you see at this level? What do you see at this level? What do you see at this level? How might you interpret what you've seen to get a sense of what the environment was like as those rocks were being laid down? And there's a lot of drawing, there's a lot of sampling as you go up the section. There's these things that are called sort of mapping sticks, which are these exactly 1 meter tall things, and you have to sort of tilt them at the angle of the rocks so you can get a sense of how thick each of these layers are, and you sort of just march across the stratigraphy and look at that. So is that sort of what you were asking about, Callie?
Yes, it was. So another question for you as a follow-up, so that's good to get an idea of what you did. Did you have anything that you would consider, what technology did you bring with you, and was any of it wearable that you wore on your body?
So the two big things that we use for the field, for the geology, for the Yellowstone type field work, the two big things that we want to do is making sort of real-time measurements. So what's the temperature of the hot spring, like I was saying, the temperature and the pH of the hot spring, as well as things like, can we measure particular chemical compounds that break down very quickly? That's really important to be able to measure those right in the field, because if you collect a sample and then take it back to the lab, the compounds that you're trying to look for, they're very reactive, they've gone away. And so the temperature and pH meters are things that sort of wearable in a sense. The meter itself is about the size of a pen, and you drop it into the hot spring and you make the measurements. The container that does the measuring is, about the size of a small book. But that would be, those kinds of things, those types of measurements are very important, and they're the most basic thing we do whenever we go to a new hot spring. In terms of doing the geological field work where you're looking at hard rocks, things like a GPS locator are really important, because it allows you to take a map of the area that you're looking at and say, okay, this is the exact area that I looked at. Maybe if I look at it from a different perspective tomorrow, I might get a different view on things. But if you don't know where you went, it's harder to figure out how to look at it in a different perspective. So those are the two big things for the two different types of field work that we take with us.
Okay, and are there things where you would be out in the field and you'd be like, oh my gosh, if only I have this at my desk, or I know where this knowledge is, but I don't have it with me. What are some things that you might have wished you had on you or had access to when you're in the field that just wasn't there?
So let's see. For the biological field work, for the Yellowstone type field work, the kind of things that would be useful would be there's a lot of work that's done about microbes, and there are some people who are very very knowledgeable about it. But having that information, being able to sort of look at a microbial mat and say, well, if I know it's this temperature and I know it's this pH, what is it probably? Is it probably this type of organism that we know uses sulfur or whatever for its interactions? Well, maybe if that's the case, then maybe what we want to measure here is the sulfur species, the sulfur compounds that are in this hot spring. So being able to make that, being able to make that quick turnaround, what is it likely to be? What might that tell us about the follow-up measurements that we want to do, as opposed to having to take the sample back to the lab, do the genetic testing, and then come back the next year and say, okay, this is probably the same sample we were looking at, let's make those measurements. That would be one thing. Some other things are just general information about, one of the things that we always joke about in geology is there are a couple rocks that wind up looking a lot alike when you're in the field, and there's certain tests that you can do for them. One of them is literally you take a drop of acid and you put it on there, and a particular type of carbonate will do one thing and a different type of related mineral will do something else. But there are some things that look so similar that you really can't tell unless you do like a micro probe on them. And the joke for years amongst field geologists is, well, if we only had a micro probe that we could take with us into the field and actually make those compound measurements, that would tell us a lot about what's going on in the system as we're looking at it.
Cool, thanks. Well, David has a question for you.
Hey, Lindsay. So I just thought of a question based on what you were saying. How many, when you go out in the field and do this type of work, how many people usually do it? Is it a solitary thing, or is it a group of people? How does that work?
So we don't like to go out into the field alone for a whole range of things. I just lost video. Is everybody still there?
Yes, I just took off for a minute. So when you see us do that, don't worry about it.
Okay,
So,
just make sure I didn't hang up accidentally or something. We don't tend to like to go into the field by ourselves. Mostly that's a safety reason. But I think what you're really getting at is, do you work in large teams or do you work in small teams? And is that sort of what you're looking for? So the teams,
yeah.
We tend to work in large teams because it's easier to, and especially for the Yellowstone work, it's easier to go as a group, make a bunch of measurements, collect a bunch of samples in as short of a time span as you can, so that you know that all of those measurements that you're making were collected at the same time as all of those samples, right? If you collect the samples one day and then there's a huge rainstorm and then you go back and you collect temperature, pH measurements, it might not mean you've got the same system that you're measuring. And so that's one of the things where we like large groups so that we can go in, do a bunch of things at once, and then move on to another spot. For the more geological type field work, there tends to be just a lot of measurements that need to be made, and collecting samples from a whole bunch of different section goes a lot faster if you've got a group of people. So it tends to be groups. At least 4 usually, but I've been in the field with up to groups of 12 people or so. So those get to be a little hectic.
Yeah, it's funny to hear you talk about that, because there's things where we have something called the A-train in space. So there are spacecraft that go one after another, so that they're all making measurements, and they're looking at, some of them looking at clouds, some of them looking at the water, some are looking at the land, and we want them to go in close time together, so that we can line up things. And actually, it was funny, it was a coincidence the first time it happened, and now we do it on purpose. So yeah. David has a question.
Yes, so I have a follow-up question to that. You mentioned that you have to do a lot of planning.
Yeah.
So when you go in the field with a team of people, do you have someone that's kind of like a conductor that says, like, here's the plan, and you're going to do this, you're going to do this, and let's make sure this is happening, this is not happening, that type of stuff?
For a lot of it, actually, it's sort of a little bit different. What it tends to be is a bunch of people say, we'll have a meeting before we go in the field, and everybody will say, well, this is the type of work I want to do, and these are the places that I want to go for that. And you'll sort of get together and you'll say, okay, well, if person A wants to do these types of measurements and person C wants to do those other types of measurements, but they both want to do it in the same place, well, we should at least have one day where everybody goes to that place. And you sort of, everybody brings their own plan together, and then you see how to make it fit together in the best way, which means that some days, you'll be in the field for 10 days, say, and you only really have 6 days worth of work. And so some days you're just sort of helping other people get their work done. And then other days people will be helping you. So you not only have to plan for what you want to do, but sometimes you also have to plan, okay, how will I explain what I want to do to somebody else who it may be a different person every day, who's going to be helping that day. So it's you're planning for yourself and some other person who has some technical background, but maybe not in your field particular.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So when you're in the field, how do you guys, since you're making measurements in different places, how do you communicate? I mean, because some cell coverage is maybe not always available. What's the communication between you and other people in the field?
During the day of?
Yeah, like when you're out in the field, you guys aren't all in the same place. So how do you communicate and make sure that you do the plan, or if there's any updates, if something were to change, how would you people know?
Yep, and so that's kind of funny. We actually had one of the few days where we went in and actually had only 3 people in the field. Was one of the days where one of the people had gone off to go and make another measurement, and she was going to come back, and the 2 of us, myself and the other person there, are sort of looking fearfully at the sky because there's a huge thunderstorm coming in, and we're not sure when we need to get moving and all that kind of stuff. So some days there's a lot of yelling across the field, and other days when we're more prepared, there's walkie-talkies. But it's in general, you sort of have a plan, and people, very low tech. People sort of will circulate and okay, well, if I'm about done with this experiment, so so-and-so went down over there to look at that hot spring, so maybe you can go and see if they need any more help, or tell them that we're thinking about heading out in about 20 minutes unless they need more help, that kind of thing. So very low tech. We try and get walkie-talkies, but sometimes that doesn't work as well. When you've got mountains in between.
Yeah, and also, one thing is the weather conditions. Yes, are a big thing. Keep, just like anyone who's on or anything, keeping aware of those is difficult. All right, well, we have a question from the field about wearables. This is one for David. So it says, ODI-G looks very cool, but has NASA looked into Meta, and it has the getmeta.com. And so what's the #1 feature NASA is looking for in an I think it's AR, augmented reality glass system.
Okay, so so I guess you heard the news about JC is looking into using the ODG smart glasses for some of their investigations. So in that case, Johnson Space Center, sorry to use an acronym, but Johnson Space Center, they decided to purchase ODG glasses and develop their software in Android, run those smart glasses and test it for astronauts out in the field. At KSC, the project that we're working on, we're also using Android, but instead of using a commercial off-the-shelf product, we're going to actually build our own smart glasses from components that are available on the market. We want to build something very custom to NASA's particular needs, but we will be using Android. So has NASA looked into Meta? Yes, actually at KSC we have looked into Meta. Meta's pretty cool. Right now, we actually, not my particular team, but another team I know is looking into Meta because of their augmented reality capability, which is actually very similar to another glass system that you've also probably heard about, which is Microsoft's HoloLens. And in that case, JPL has been working closely with Microsoft in developing software for the HoloLens, which I believe JPL is going to start using it this summer. And so in terms of your question, what is the #1 feature NASA is looking for in an augmented reality glass system? Actually, so I can only answer this question from a Kennedy Space Center perspective and our ground operations technicians. And their #1 feature is not as augmented reality as when people think of augmented reality. The most important thing they're looking for is a better way to communicate. So today, technicians are out in the field and communicate is through just voice, purely voice. And the issues they encounter is that with voice, you can't always describe the situation in front of you. So right now what they're doing is a really simple solution, and they're taking their iPhones or whatever smartphone they have, taking pictures and emailing it to the engineer that's not out in the field. But when we spoke to them, they mentioned that it would be really helpful if there was a way to communicate with them with video that's live. So in terms of KSC, that's one of the main features we're focusing on, is having live video communication. So a first-person perspective to see exactly what they're working on to someone out who might be in launch control and can have more information about the system and be able to help them. So the number one feature is all about communication. That's the most important thing by far.
Thanks. That's good. And let's see. Go back to, so I don't know if David, do you have any more questions for Lindsay?
Yeah, actually, Lindsay. So you heard me mention how video was a really big issue that ground operations technicians were really interested in. And so I was thinking, as you were describing your situation, are there ever times where you are out in the field and you see something and you have no idea what it is, but you know that somewhere else knows exactly what it is, but if only you could communicate with her and show her exactly what you're seeing? Is that ever a case, and would that type of feature be helpful?
You know, it would, in particular, especially, I mean, I imagine, so when you go into the field in a new location, you generally have a couple people who have been to this area before. And so they tend to be able to know a lot more. Okay, well, you know, this is the kind of thing we're expecting to see, maybe not, whatever. And you also will tend to go into the field with some very advanced geologists and some very new geologists. And I imagine, for future sort of thinking about like future space, human spaceflight, we only sent one geologist ever to the moon, right? And so if you ever are going to be interested in doing that kind of research in the future, you're not going to send a lot of people who can look at this particular feature and say, oh, well, that's definitely a whatever. And so, when you go into the field and you have these, these sort of pillars of geology, the people, not the physical structures. When you go into the field with these people, you have to split up. You can't split one person in two and take them into different teams. But there are definitely times where you'll see something that's a bit new, and you definitely want to say to that person, I saw this thing, and what winds up usually happening is later that night around the campfire, you say, I was over in that one valley over there, and I saw this feature. Have you ever seen it before? What do you think it's related to? And sometimes just being able to show somebody, you can always describe it. And we geologists, part of what we do when we take, and perhaps this actually answers the other question you guys were asking before about wearables, we take we do a lot of drawings. This is what this thing looked like, because you can remember it, but drawing it helps to sort of cement it in your head. And so, later that night over the campfire, you say, look, I saw this really weird feature, and it had this fold like this, or it had these sort of things that I think might have been stromatolites, but I'm not really sure. When you know that there's somebody else there, if you could call somebody up and be like, hey, look at this thing. Is this what you were talking about yesterday when you were asking about that? Or, is this something you've ever seen before? Is this something we should spend more time looking into, or use that, that micro probe to measure exactly the chemical composition? That would be great. That would definitely be great. So.
Oh, great. Thanks for letting us know. All right, and so we have another augmented reality one from Blaze that we'll go to, and then we'll talk to Lindsay a little bit about Mars lava tubes before we wrap up. So the question is, would AR, augmented reality glasses be used stationary inside a RAPS rover be useful? And I'm not sure what the RAPS rover is. Are you familiar with that?
Not sure exactly, but I'm assuming some kind of robotic rover. So I'm going to answer the question assuming that. So would glasses used in stationary inside a RAPS rover be useful? So I guess the way I would answer it is, if you're asking a rover that has a camera on it would be useful for someone somewhere else with the glasses, would that be useful for them? And the answer would be yes, because those robotic rovers can get in places where humans cannot go, or it would be difficult for them to go, or maybe it's dangerous for them to go. So, it's augmented reality glasses would be useful since they would be able to provide them a view that they normally can't see. So, yes, I would say it is useful.
Because it's definitely, in a way, that's what our rovers on Mars are basically.
Right.
I think Curiosity has like 24 cameras or something close to that on it. So we're using them to get a lot of great things. And then we have another question. I'm not sure if we know the answer from Powell. What do you think about an augmented telescope to observe the sky? I'm not sure.
Augmented. I think I know what it's meaning. Okay. So Powell, I hope I'm explaining. So I think what you mean is a telescope that is observing the sky, and a telescope also sees what you're seeing and can then point things out into telescope. So it could say, that little white dot there, that's this particular star. So I think that's what you mean, and if that's what you mean, then I think that could be useful. Yeah, it would make the job of identifying what the telescope is seeing much easier than just basically you have to have the knowledge ahead of time.
Yeah. Yes, as somebody who, as much as I am a space geek and I'm an engineer for NASA, so the science of what I'm looking at and stuff, I don't know, man.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
But I love this guy. Okay, and then we have another one. Actually, let's see. I think what we'll do is we'll go back to Lindsay and talk about the Mars lava tube, and then if there are any more, it looks like we're getting some more space wearables questions, we'll ask those to David. So Lindsay, can you tell us just a little bit about for the people who are working on Survivor Mars lava tubes, what are lava tubes, and just a little bit about them?
Sure. So lava tubes are formed when you have a lot of molten rock that's flowing, and as the rock cools, you start to get it cools from the outside in, just the same way that an ice cube melts from the outside in. When it cools from the outside in, you get sort of a crusted surface on the top, but that insulates the flowing molten lava underneath, which means that you get a sort of a surface, and then as the other edges are cooling and stuff, you can get these tubes, and these tubes wind up having lava flowing from them. They're solid, they solidify from the outside in, and then in the inside they insulate these flows for miles and miles and miles. And so we see them in a lot of different places. We see them actively forming these today in Hawaii, and in places like that they can actually take lava that's flowing relatively slowly at the surface, and therefore you would imagine would solidify very close to the source, and they can actually transport and insulate this lava so that it flows for miles and miles and miles, I think 20, 30 miles, before it comes back out on the surface somewhere far away. So these things can be very, very long. They can be very big. Some of the lava tubes that we know of on Earth are, tens of feet, tens of meters tall, very big, and therefore they provide, and so they've been thought of as a potential way. They're sort of like caves. They're caves that form in a sort of a depositional type of way, as opposed to a rock that's put in place by whatever form, and then pieces of it are eaten away. So they're an alternate way for caves to form when you don't have a lot of water in the system. Is that?
All right. Well, great. Thanks. You know that. I do have another question. So David actually didn't realize he had to go right now. I knew he was coming up soon, but we have another question. It says, I'm developing a virtual reality system by 3D goggles and head tracking to control a 3D camera on a robot, so you can simulate your motion and view of the field in the robot out in space and labs. Is that something that is a space wearable, or does it belong to something else? And so David he read that question before he left, and he said that yes, he does consider that a space wearable, so we'd love to see your solution for that. All right, and I haven't seen any more questions, so I don't know if Lindsay, if you have anything else you want to mention before we go away, or if you have any interesting things to note about this.
I think I'm good. I appreciated participating in this. I hope I was able to provide a little bit of background information, and thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. I appreciate you taking the time, and even David was, when I set this up, he's like, oh, I have some questions of why he joined us. So thanks a lot, and good luck. We look forward to seeing your solutions. Bye.